Hello friends, welcome to EPG Pathshala. The today's module is on sentencing in socio-economic offences. I am Zainab Fatima, Assistant Professor, Sharda University, Greater Noida. The learning outcomes of today's module will be to understand the features of socio-economic offences, to understand the development of socio-economic offences, to identify the difference between socio-economic offences and the white-collar offences, to get the idea of the laws and governmental efforts to address the issue of the socio-economic offences, and to study the judicial decisions on the issue. Today, the state is a welfare state which controls a number of means of production and distribution of goods and material services. Because of these functions of the state multiplied to a greater extent, which overburdened its administration and led to the inefficient functioning of the governmental machinery, and it became a fertile ground for the expansion of socio-economic offences like bribery, corruption, smuggling, violation of foreign exchange regulations, undervoicing, overvoicing, black marketing, hoarding and profiteering, etc. There are many other areas where new offences are emerging in menacing proportions, such as the term socio-economic offences of crime are widely used to denote the number of crimes which are of economic and financial nature. Professor Albert Morris, in the paper titled Criminal Capitalists, presented by Edwin Hill in 1872 before the International Congress on the Prevention and Regression of Crime at London, had drawn the attention of criminologists towards this newer form of criminality in 1934. Then concept was used in the term white collar crime, coined by the criminologist Edwin Sutherland to explain the crimes committed by the respectable persons and the persons with high social status. Socio-economic offences are usually considered to be synonymous with white-collar crimes, the latter being narrower in scope, although there is an intersection between these two. In socio-economic offences should not necessarily be committed in connection of one's occupation, but in white-collar crime there is a nexus between the offending act and the occupation. What is required is that the offence should be committed against either or both health or material welfare of the community, or against the social economic interest of the community, and the individual victim is not the individual but the community or society at large. White collar crime may be described as a crime committed in the course of one's occupation by a member of the upper class or society. For example, a manufacturer of drug who deliberately supplies substandard drugs, or a big corporation guilty of fraudulent evasion of tax. But a person who is a pensioner who submits false returns may not be committing a white collar crime, but interestingly both are socio-economic offences. Socio-economic offences are offences which affect the economy or the welfare of the community as a whole and not merely of the individual victim. For example, a person who illegally smuggles for his personal use a costly television set, or a pensioner who submits a false return of income are not white collar criminals, there being no connection between their occupation and the crime committed by them, but they are socio-economic offenders. The most important feature of these offences is the fact that ordinarily they do not involve an individual or a direct victim, but are punished because they harm the whole society. For example, Hawala scandal of 1990, Telgi scam 2002, Satyam scam 2009, Commonwealth Games scam 2010, 2G Spectrum scam 2008 and coal allocation scam of 2012. The present era has been remarkable for the development of the field of the science of technology, and which led to the Industrial Revolution all over the world, which abruptly changed the entire social, economical and political structure of our society. As a result, people abandoned the high cultural goals and socially approved techniques of achieving them, because an overwhelming emphasis is made on achieving certain objectives like political powers, monopolistic control over business and high economic status, without due regard to the question of whether they can be achieved by legally approved means or not. Consequently, high ethical standards and moral values were discarded in favor of power, money and material things. Such circumstances have made the environment more conducive for the growth of this newer form of criminality, particularly in developing countries like India. Thus, all sorts of antisocial activities like frauds, corruption, adulteration of foods, etc. are now carried on a large scale by the persons of upper and middle socio-economic classes in the course of their trade, commerce, industry and other professions as well. Socio-economic offences development can be traced into three phases. First phase came after the British emerged victorious in the War of Succession to the Mughal rule, and adverse changes began to appear in the social and economic structure of the country. The second phase of socio-economic offences started with the freedom and partition of India. At the time when India won its freedom, it was suffering from the scarcity of everything, including administrative machinery, because when the Britishers left India, it was too difficult to set up immediately an efficient and honest administrative machinery. The third phase came through rapid industrial development and urbanization, where socio-economic offences got much more chance for their growth and development. The Indian Penal Code is the first law containing some provisions for curbing socio-economic offences. However, the Santhanam Committee declared that IPC in day-to-day context of socio-economic offences cannot operate in any satisfactory manner. There are some salient features of this kind of offences which can be discussed as follows. Motive of the criminal is avarice in such kind of offences, that is, there is no lust or hate in the criminal. The background of the criminal is non-emotional, unlike murder, rape, defamation, etc. There is no emotional reaction as between the victim and the offender. The victim is usually the state or a section of a public, particularly the consuming public, that is, that portion which consumes goods or services, buys shares or securities or other intangibles. Even where there is an individual victim, the more important element of the offence is harm to the society. The mode of operation of the offender is fraud and not force. Usually the act is deliberate and willful. The interest protected is twofold: social interest in the preservation of the property or wealth or health of its individual members and national resources, and the general economic system as a whole from exploitation or waste by the individuals or groups. Social interest in the augmentation of the wealth of the country by enforcing the laws relating to taxes and duties, foreign exchange, foreign commerce, industries and the like. Two very important aspects of social and economic offences have to be emphasized in this context: the gravity of the harm caused to the society and the nature of the offences themselves. Mens rea is also an element as per the criminal law. Mens rea and actus reus are two cardinal principles of criminal liability, but it should be noted that in cases of socio-economic offences, the element of mens rea is not necessary, or we can say that these are strict liability offences. Now coming to the governmental response. In response to mounting public criticism and demands within Parliament, the Government of India had appointed the Santhanam Committee in 1962 to look into the problems of corruption and administrative reforms. After that, they had appointed the Vanchu Committee on 2nd of March 1970. The duty of these committees were to focus its attention on the problem of black money which is accumulated through violation of foreign exchange regulations, black marketing and hoarding, etc. The committee made suitable suggestions for certain amendments in statutes dealing with socio-economic offences. The suggestions of these committees led the Indian legislature to enact more laws, like for example the Foreign Exchange Regulation Act of 1973, the Smuggling and Foreign Exchange Manipulators Act 1976, the Control of Foreign Exchange and Prevention of Smuggling Act of 1974 and the Criminal Procedure Act of 1973. Similarly, Law Commission of India had suggested many changes in the statute dealing with socio-economic offences so as to make the punishments more stringent for punishing the socio-economic offenders. Besides the above mentioned acts, some main enactments which deal with socio-economic offences, the Santhanam Committee report suggested institutional mechanisms and process-related steps to fight corruption while examining various administrative, legal and social problems of corruption and classified socio-economic offences into 8 categories. First, offences calculated to prevent or obstruct the economic development of the country and endanger its economic health. Second class included evasion and avoidance of taxes lawfully imposed. Third, includes misuse of their position by public servants in making contracts and disposal of public property, issuing of licenses and permits and similar other matters. Fourth category includes delivery by individuals and industrial and commercial undertakings of goods not in accordance what agreed with specifications in the fulfillment of contracts entered into with public authorities. The fifth includes profiteering, black marketing and hoarding. Sixth includes adulteration of foodstuffs and drugs. Seventh category includes theft and misappropriation of public property and funds. And the last category includes trafficking in licenses and permits, etc. Out of the many recommendations of this committee, 3 follow-up measures deserve special mention. The first is the Central Vigilance Commission, which is independent of the ministerial control, and it was set up as an apex body in 1964. Out of the pattern of the CVC, the state governments were advised to set up state-level vigilance commissions in respect of their employees. Some states did so, while others simply set up anti-corruption bureaus as separate entities and not as part of the Vigilance Commission. The second is the Prevention of Corruption Act of 1947, which was amended to the extent that the definition of the corruption, criminal misconduct, to include possession of assets, movable and immovable, disproportionate to the known sources of legitimate income of a public servant. Such assets would be presumed to have been acquired by corrupt or illegal means, and the onus to disprove this would lie on the suspected public servant. This act was replaced by the Prevention of Corruption Act 1988, which broadened the definition of public servant to include certain categories of legislators and other leaders of public offices. The Delhi Special Police Establishment, originally set up in 1941, was also converted into Central Bureau of Investigation, popularly known as CBI, in 1963, with more extensive powers and responsibilities as the apex anti-corruption investigation agency at the central level. It contains specialized economic offences wing. The Santhanam Committee also recommended addition of a new chapter in IPC, but the 29th Law Commission of India report rejected the proposal and observed that such offences are better left to be dealt with by the special and self-containing enactments which supplement the basic criminal law. Again, The 42nd Law Commission report of 1971 suggested the revision of IPC, but it never came a reality. It is worth noting that in most of the cases which the Santhanam committee has identified, there is an undeniable element of economic benefit in terms of actual monetary value or advantage in terms of comparative enrichment. The Law Commission in its 29th report identified the following common features. The offences are committed by upper class of society. The second, those upper classes themselves set the moral standards of society, and hence a serious view is not taken of these offences. Third, the victim of the offences are uncertainable persons, usually the state or community as a whole, as contrasted with the IPC, where most of the offences are against a specific individual or a group of individual. But these features are based on white collar crimes, which, as stated earlier, is only a subset of socio-economic offences, as it is not necessary that upper classes of society are involved in every case, like for example beggary, though its nature as an offence is controversial. The Committee on Reforms of the Criminal Justice System 2003, popularly known as Malimat Committee report, recommended changes in the criminal justice system in India and observed that the judges were granted wide discretionary powers in awarding sentences within the statutory limits. The committee was also of the opinion that as there was no guidance in selecting the most appropriate sentence in the given factual situation thereof, there was no uniformity in awarding sentences as the discretion was exercised according to the judgment of every particular judge. So, the committee emphasized the need for having sentencing guidelines to minimize this uncertainty in awarding sentences. It also recommended the appointment of a statutory committee to lay down the sentencing guidelines. Now, coming to the judicial response to this particular problem, but before that, it is worthy to note that Ashworth cites four main stages in the progress of assessing the seriousness of an offence. According to him, first is determining the interest that is violated. Second is the quantification of the effect of the victim's living standard. Third is the culpability of the offender. And the fourth is the remoteness of the actual harm. In Ishar Das versus State of Punjab in 1972, the Apex Court observed that the Prevention of Food Adulteration Act is enacted with aim of eradicating anti-social evil against public health, and court should not lightly resort to the provisions of the Probation of Offenders Act. The 47th report of the Law Commission has also recommended the exclusion of the Probation of Offenders Act to social and economic offences. In another case called Pyarali versus Madhav in 1974, the Supreme Court has cautioned that the kind of application of the probation principle is negative by the imperatives of social defense. No chances can be taken by society with a man whose antisocial operations disguised as a respectable trade imperil numerous innocents. In India, the government has not yet evolved a sentencing policy as there is no legislation that provides sentencing guidelines. In another case called State of Uttar Pradesh versus Sanjay Kumar 2012, the Supreme Court reiterated the general principles of sentencing guidelines, the objectives and the need of having a sentencing guideline in cases of socio-economic offences. In State of Gujarat versus Mohan Lal and another 1987, the Honorable Supreme Court observed that the entire community is aggrieved if socio-economic offenders who ruin the economy of the state are not brought to books. A murder may be committed in the heat of moment or passion, but a socio-economic offence is always committed with cool calculations and deliberate designs with an eye on personal profits regardless of the consequence to the community. A disregard for the interest of the community can be manifested only at the cost of forfeiting the trust and faith of the community in the system to administer justice in an even-handed manner without fear of criticism from the quarters which view white-collar crimes with a permissive eye, mindful of the damage done to the national economy and national interest. In another case called Lalit Goyal versus Commissioner of Central Excise 2007, the court, while dealing with the bail application in case of Custom Act, observed that the economic offences constitute a class apart and need to be visited with a different approach in the matter of bail. Noting ever-growing materialistic outlook setting unscrupulous elements on a prowl to maximize material gains by unlawful manner, this court even suggested appropriate legislative measures and judicial intervention to safeguard the interest of the state and public at large. In another case, Prem Kumar versus State 1989, the court observed that such offences are worse than even murders. It observed that the economic and social offences having deep-rooted conspiracies and involving huge loss of public funds, whether of nationalized banks or of state and its instrumentalities, need to be viewed seriously and considered as grave offences affecting the economy of the country as a whole and thereby posing serious threat to the financial health of the country. Therefore, the persons involved in such offences, particularly those who continue to reap the benefits of the crime committed by them, do not deserve any kind of sympathy. In another case called Central Bureau of Investigation versus Jagjit Singh 2013, the court observed that such offences are social wrongs and they have immense societal impact, and the ultimate victim is the collective. It also creates a hazard in the financial interest of the society and creates a dent in the economic spine of the nation as well. Another case is that of CBI versus Maninder Singh 2015, where the court said that development in means of communication, science and technology, etc., have led to an enormous increase in socio-economic offences. In Jagan Mohan Reddy versus CBI 2013 again, the Supreme Court held that socio-economic offences constitute a class apart and hence a different approach needs to be taken in matters of bail. The economic offences having deep-rooted conspiracies and involving huge public loss needs to be viewed seriously because it affects not only a group of persons or the society but the nation at large. In a similar case of Nimagada Prasad versus CBI 2013, the appellant was accused of committing grave economic offence of alienating prime lands to selected private companies under the wheel of development using deceptive means resulting in wrongful ownership and control of material resources. The court held that socio-economic crimes, unlike other crimes, are committed when cool calculations and deliberate designs are made with an eye on personal profit regardless of its harmful consequences to the society at large. The court reiterated the circumstances of granting the bail as it was laid down in Y.S. Mohan Reddy's case and held that bail should not be granted easily in socio-economic offences. In the case of Mahendra Prasad versus State 2008, the Delhi High Court held that the appellant who was working in the office of Sub-Registrar of Properties Delhi was convicted for accepting bribe from the complainant in the matter of supplying of a certified copy. He was awarded punishment of 2 and 4 years under sections 7 and 13 of the Prevention of Corruption Act. The appellant filed a criminal appeal and an application for suspension of sentence under section 389 of CRPC, but the High Court rejected the same, holding that the present case is not fit for the same. Another case is that of B.G. Goswami versus Delhi Administration 1974, where the accused was convicted under the Prevention of Corruption Act, and it was observed that question of sentence is always a difficult question requiring proper adjustment and balancing of various considerations which weigh with a judicial mind in determining its appropriate quantum in the given case. The main purpose of the sentence, as broadly stated, is that the accused must realize that he has committed an act which is not only harmful to the society of which he forms an integral part, but is also harmful to his own future, both as an individual and as a member of the society. In another case called State Represented by Inspector of Police Central Crime Branch versus R. Vasanthi Stanley 2014, the Supreme Court said that lack of awareness, knowledge or intent is neither to be considered nor accepted in socio-economic offences. An offence under the criminal law is an offence and it does not depend upon the gender of an accused person. In conclusion, we can say that even though in India the major effort to control and regulate the socio-economic offences is on the legislative side, but it is also heartening to know that the judiciary has also played quite a significant role in this regard by properly interpreting the various provisions of Prevention of Corruption Act 1988, the Prevention of Food Adulteration Act 1954, the Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic Substances Act of 1985, Essential Commodities Act 1955, Foreign Exchange Management Act 1999, the Information Technology Act of 2000, the Prevention of Money Laundering Act of 2002, the Food and Safety Standard Act 2006, etc., to achieve the desired results and to save our economy and society from the clutches and bad effects of socio-economic crimes. We can make certain suggestions to control or tackle the menace created by such socio-economic offences. Such suggestions would include the increase in the maximum punishments under the various acts, the increase in the minimum punishments under the various acts, imposition of restrictions on the discretion of the court to relax without totally removing it, the trial of these offences by special judges or of senior cadre judges. The sentencing in socio-economic offences should not run concurrently but consecutively. The fines in these cases should be partly based on seriousness of the offence and partly on the availability of the individual or corporation to pay, but ensuring that its deterrence is not lost. Higher punishments, including life imprisonment in bigger bribery cases involving crores of rupees compared to petty corruption cases involving hundreds and thousands. The strengthening of other enforcement agencies besides police, such as Central Bureau of Investigation, Directorate of Revenue Intelligence, Directorate of Enforcement and Vigilance Bureau, etc., is also the sine qua non for controlling such crimes in India. A separate wing of the law enforcement agencies are dealing with digital crimes, money laundering, economic offences and terrorist activities. The agencies do not have the convergence among themselves, but the criminals have. Criminals are working in a borderless world, but the police in one state is still grappling with the procedures on how to arrest a person residing in another state. So, there should be communication between the separate wings of law enforcement agencies. The general provisions of withdrawal of prosecution should be exempted from the Prevention of Corruption Act 1988. The nexus between politicians, bureaucrats, and corporate criminals should be checked and controlled, and for which we require impartial, committed, and sincere investigating agencies and enforcement machineries. With this, the module on sentencing of socio-economic offences is over. I hope you have learned something new. Thank you for watching this module.